YouTube just turned on. Should work now.
Um, yep, got it.
Okay, how did it go since last time?
Um, yep, so I've done, well, I think it was 7 things of the example things we brainstormed. So there's like, so it was in 3 sessions. The third session was a little bit before this, where I meant to spend longer but got sidetracked on some stuff. And so I decided to do like a 1 minute for planning and 5 minutes for writing thing. The other 2 sessions, like, both took about 2 hours all up, which I was sort of surprised at, but um, um, yeah, I guess sort of probably is reflected in the quality compared to the quick one. Um,
Okay, so how well did it go? Were you able
um,
to do it? Did you find it useful?
uh, the the only thing like I left the first thing I tried, which was why shouldn't you look at the sun? Because I ended up going into too much detail. But the other ones I think weren't so bad. I have some particular questions about some of them. Um, like uh, I'm not sure I'm necessarily going with the right approach, and that I feel like I end up giving a lot of examples, but maybe that's sort of good. Um, I mean, I guess with simpler stuff like this, it's harder to be abstract. Like, um, oh my God, I've got some devices talking to me. Sorry. Um, so, uh, yeah, so I'm not sure. Like, I think in what was it? The shoes one, I think. I sort of like left a comment where I described this thing as like an example trap, where I don't feel like I'm really explaining the thing. I'm trying not to describe things. Not to just say, like the tides examples are probably good for that. Oh, the water tides, that's probably a good one to sort of talk about because I sort of felt like not, like I didn't want to write anything more than one sentence for it. Um, Maybe that was just because I did why are there tides right beforehand, but um, yeah, I noticed as well that I didn't quite stick to my like planning stuff or the notes that I wrote at the beginning about like what do you call it? Uh, there was one thing, oh, like write a goal. I think I had writing a goal down. Yeah, have goal written down. Like I didn't end up doing that for any of them, I think, just because it felt trivial. So I sort of iterated on that, but I didn't pay really close attention. So I'm not sure if I've stuck to it and whether everything's sort of good. Um, but I
Yeah,
definitely feel like they're better and it was easier on the whole.
the goal's not trivial if it includes the audience.
Yeah, okay.
Because it definitely makes a difference for how to write it. What sort of person you're trying to talk to, and then what sort of help you want to give them or whatever. With the stuff in general, there are many right answers. Like there's many ways to write something that are okay. You can't aim for perfect. There isn't really a perfect. You just have to
Yep.
find something that's pretty good and accomplishes whatever you're trying to accomplish. So like there are a lot of ways to go wrong, but there's also a lot of flexibility about different valid ways to write.
Yep. I s- didn't care as much about the audience while I was writing in session 2 and 3. Um, like those things I tried to focus more on, uh, like so I focused more on like outline sentences or topic sentences. Um, and I think I tried to keep the ideas like a little bit tighter in terms of by paragraphs and stuff. Like one thing that's maybe good is like the why are there tides. I feel like as far as like science stuff goes, it's sort of like 3 paragraphs, which is much better than the why shouldn't you look at the sun one. Um, but I'm not sure if that sort of compromises it or whether it's sort of better when I try not to write it for an audience or when I
Did you
don't
get
try to write for an
anywhere
audience.
with the videos?
Um, Not a huge amount. I sort of, uh, I mean, what I'm finding is that I don't end up concentrating on them. Um, is that I sort of like have them on in the background or something, but then don't listen to them very much. So I've sort of like um, tried to go through it. Well, I've gone through the bureaucracy stuff a bit more, but um, yeah, it's so I've sort of been, I don't know, I don't quite know why yet. In terms of, uh, it feels a lot easier to be focused when I'm more active, even if it's like lower quality. Um, yeah.
Have you tried changing the speed higher or lower?
What I end up finding is that when I increase the speed, um, I have trouble like comprehending it as it goes. Um, which is
Right,
sort of a funny thing
you're
to
running
say.
into your
Yeah.
limit on hearing the words?
Yeah, particularly with like I'm not sure. So I listen to other stuff on like 1.5 is usually pretty comfortable. Um, but even like I mean I can sort of like not worry too much at like 1.2 or something like that, 1.3. But yeah, because it's something that I end up needing to concentrate a bit more on, because the ideas aren't as familiar. I think that's sort of part of the thing. I don't think
Okay.
I've given myself like so I was just thinking about one of the things we were talking about like 2 or 3 weeks ago, um, when like trying to do stuff, and I know we were talking particularly about like higher quality output stuff at that point, um, but I don't think I've really given myself like a proper fair go in that it's usually I don't prioritize it very much, and so when I do like play one of the grammar videos, or you know where I'm up to, I end up um, like I guess I don't like there's other stuff going on or whatever else around me that I let myself get distracted by. I don't like turn everything off and make sure that I'm just trying to concentrate on that fairly, if that makes sense. So I think I
Okay.
probably
I
need to do that.
suggest that you skip the rest of the bureaucracy video for now and try moving on to analyzing lies stuff next time and
Yep,
see if it catches your interest better.
yep.
Okay, so let's go through the writing. So this is the notes about writing. It's not one of the writing.
Yeah, no, that's
Outline,
not.
purpose, vagueness. Why shouldn't you look at the sun? Lots of photons, energy, affects molecules, focusing, normal daylight. Okay, kinda sciency.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's. So
Well,
I ended up
it's kind of a
oh
middle ground, like semi-sciency, but not really like what a scientist would say.
yeah. Um, so I did try and keep it more simple. There's a few points. Like I think I actually stripped out the mention of any photons. Like I had that in one of the earlier stuff. Um, anyway, you'll notice that the last line is like a parenthetical where I say stopping here. Um, basically because I felt like I was going to spend way too much time on it continuing down that line, and that it was probably like yeah, I felt like without more editing or without trying to like change the whole thing, that it was probably good enough to find any mistakes or you know issues with type thing. as in there was a point of diminishing returns sort of thing, continuing with it.
So what are these outline sentence markers? Are these sentences from the outline that didn't end up getting used?
So some of them describe the next one, and otherwise, yeah, pretty much they're. I think the second last one there has an extra sentence, but otherwise they're basically outlines, like they're what I wrote as a bit of an outline sentence. So they're a bit more. Some of them might be copy pasted from the notes at the top, but otherwise they're a bit more developed. So it's just sort of to give a direction of where I was going because, yeah, because I didn't end up wanting to finish it because I felt like it was too big. Um, so I mean, for that reason, it might not be the best one to look at, but it was the first one that I tried.
Okay, yeah, this is like a weird level of detail. It's hard to imagine what audience this is for that would be able to understand this, but also need this explanation and find it useful. So let's try another one. Swimming.
All right.
This one I can imagine an audience that finds it useful. It's it's a way of making it like a little more precise or technical than people normally would say it.
Yeah, one of the things that I routinely sort of ran into an issue with, so I guess most people do, which is why they default to describing stuff. Um, but like coming up with a good way to say what something is, um, like, yeah, what is swimming? It's sort of that I went through a few iterations on that, because it wasn't like immediately apparent to me what I should put there.
The dictionaries are more specific. They just sort of say use your limbs to propel yourself through the water.
Yeah, I didn't want to say limbs because uh fish don't have limbs.
Ah, yes, they're pretty human focused.
So so I sort of I mean there's a little bit of describiness that goes on. Um
Your focus is sort of across species.
yeah, this was one that I didn't write an out like or a brainstorm for, because I think I just forgot. Um but uh yeah, I because I didn't want to just describe people swimming. I guess one of the things I didn't consider was like the other sorts of or the other elements of the definition, like swimming as a sport, whatever else, as opposed to like swimming the most general sort of thing. So I could have gone down there, but I sort of, yeah, chose to talk about the most general thing.
Okay, why do people swim? Exercise, enjoyment, survival. Also travel.
Oh yeah,
Not common for humans anymore because we have boats and cars, but
I talk about like getting away from predators survival-wise though, which is, not very common either. So I probably should have included that. I was thinking about like the reasons people had swum in the past, but travel didn't occur to me.
this sentence is unnecessary. It doesn't add much. FYI.
Um,
This is a fairly common formulation. You see, like, there are lots of reasons for something, and it's better to just sort of say reasons without spending a whole sentence saying there are multiple reasons.
so instead of saying like some of these reasons people swim for exercise, just some reasons people swim, like just cut it out like that.
Yeah, you can do that. You can also just start with the reasons like exercise, enjoyment, and survival are some of the main reasons people swim, for example.
Yep.
Which puts the more interesting content first and makes it the subject.
It's also better as a topic sentence in terms of because I sort of use that as a like sort of as the guide for the next 3 paragraphs. So it fits better as a first sentence.
So jumping into voluntariness is pretty tangential. Like it's not what you'd expect in an explanation of why people swim.
Um, I didn't quite know where to put it because I wanted to mention something about that early on. Well, I'm not sure about early on, but I wanted to mention something about that because I talk later about like the survival thing, and so it felt out of place, sort of not to mention it because it's a uh like I feel like it's significant when you choose to do something in terms of the explanation for why people do it. Um, like most people think they get something out of swimming, which I guess is true of survival stuff as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of implied in the paragraphs themselves. Like sometimes people
Yeah.
need to swim to survive, so we know that that's not voluntary. Fun is voluntary. Exercise, you could say swim voluntarily for exercise if you wanted to, if you thought it wasn't clear enough. Yeah. Scuba diving is another type of swimming.
Oh yeah.
Right, so swimming can be good exercise. Less stressful on their body than land-based activity. I think this doesn't do a good job of explaining the main reasons that people like swimming for exercise. So not being able to put weight on a leg or having a broken arm, like those are reasons, but I think the most common reason is it's low impact compared to say running.
Oh yeah. Um,
And so it's considered nicer on the joints.
um, do I mention anything about knees in there? No. Um, so yeah, so I didn't I feel like low impact was a phrase that I was missing, which is one of the reasons I didn't write more about it. Like I'm thinking a bit about it where I'm saying like less stressful on their body. Um, but yeah, so maybe that's a like yeah, I guess it's hard to think about things that you don't have a term for sometimes, or where the term escapes you.
Yeah, are you Googling stuff or are you trying to do it without?
No, I'm trying not to Google stuff. So I don't think I think all of this is off the top of my head. I don't think I Googled any of this. Um, just because there's so much structure in what other people say, and I don't want to like bias myself too much, I guess. I'm not sure if that's good or not. Um,
So this is another example that's not very focused. Concrete sides of the pool. If you think the topic is why do people swim, and then you're talking about like a reason for preferring the ocean to a swimming pool, that's a bit of a separate issue.
yep.
Yeah, drowning, getting back to shore, boat problems. Those are major reasons. People also just fall in the water when they're next to it sometimes.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about just regular clumsiness. Mention a friend pushing them in, but yeah. I sort of left that because I felt like I was just going to give examples or something. So I added it after the fact, and yeah.
Okay, tides. Moon, sun, earth spins. I'm a little confused. We notice because the earth spins? How does the earth
I
spin result in us noticing?
um so so I guess I explained that in the last paragraph. Um, I was like I wasn't sure about leaving that part in there, but I decided to because I didn't quite know what else to say, and I wanted to indicate that there was more going on than just uh like just gravitational influence. In that yeah, like if the Earth didn't spin relative to the Moon, um, or it span like once every 28 days or whatever, um, uh, relative to the Moon, then we'd have a like a cycle time of 28 days or half, depending on how you want to count it. So I wanted to sort of mention that because it's important for answering the question, why do tides happen every 12 or 24 hours?
Yeah. The frequency wasn't really the question, why are there tides? That's like adding detail.
Yeah, okay.
But regardless, the frequency is a different issue than why we notice that there are tides. Like, I imagine if the Earth did not spin, we'd still notice tides, just with a different frequency.
Um, it sort of depends because we can't not spin relative to both the sun and the moon, and they both have like small effects. Well, the moon has a much bigger effect, but the sun has a bit of an effect. If we were like tidally locked to the moon, then we wouldn't notice the tides. Um, uh, yeah, either the moon has to like orbit around us relative to a face, like it can't be stuck in the same spot in the sky. Um, well, that's yeah, just what has to happen. So the moon going around us helps, but then us spinning sort of has um, like in some ways
Or,
both are required.
Okay, but your answer seems to involve what would actually happen in different scenarios rather than what we would notice. It's the noticing thing that I'm not really understanding.
Yeah.
Like, put a different way, if there were tides, I would expect us to notice them. And if there were not tides, then we wouldn't. So I don't think the noticing is dependent on the Earth spinning.
Yeah, okay. No, I can sort of see that, yeah.
I'm wondering what you had in mind. Maybe it's that they're more noticeable. Like it's a bigger
That's
effect because of the Earth spinning.
that's sort of closer. I mean, they're I mean, what I really mean is the frequency is higher, which yeah, well, higher. Frequency is shorter, so we like they're more readily noticeable. Like that. Like if the tides were if we didn't have a moon and the tides were only due to the sun, then I mean they'd be pretty subtle anyway, but they'd take like a year to notice, which might be hard uh, if you've got waves. But because they're every 12 hours, they're like super noticeable. So I guess I mean it's sort of I still don't know quite where I fall on it because like relative rotation is important, um, but I don't quite know how to put that except I guess saying just that. But then relative rotation is not like a normal term or something rather. So what does that mean? Um, and then essentially I'm explaining tidal locking. But I feel like as a whole, it's sort of easier to explain it in terms of the Earth spinning like spinning under the moon sort of thing. I don't know. It's I mean maybe I should have just omitted that and then I can just talk about it in the last paragraph.
This one's a bit confusing. So um I think it should be gone through in a sort of step-by-step way. So like what are the components of the argument? The moon pulls on the water. Some water is pulled more than other water. Like these are the main points, right?
Yeah.
We could add more detail about like multiple different locations on Earth and so on, but um, which water is pulled the most changes as the Earth spins the moon orbit. Sun to the moon, but weaker.
One thing that I was trying to be conscious of as well is so in terms of like answering common questions people have, sort of thing, like um,
Hmm?
so there are a few like or the two main misconceptions about tides that I know. One is that people think that it's like due exactly to the Earth rotating, um, which is like not sufficient. Like if you just have a planet that's rotating without a moon, then it's not going to have tides. Um, but the other
Right,
one is
yeah.
that low tide happens furthest away from the moon and high tide happens towards the moon, as opposed to two high tides on opposite sides and then low tide in the middle. Um, so I tried to be general enough to make that sort of come out. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that sort of distracted me from a tidier core. argument.
Does this make sense to you as a way to make it clearer? And like, do you
Yes.
sort of see how I constructed this?
I think so. Um, like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I can see it as like a simplification of my argument, sort of thing, or like a distillation. I don't know how to do that for arbitrary arguments, I guess, or at least not from the get-go. Maybe I could do it for something that I've like already written, um, but also maybe not.
For most people to understand things, I think it usually has to be a bit more like this. People have a difficult time figuring out what stuff is talking about, usually. And then if you want more detail, you can add more paragraphs, and like it takes a while to get it all across. So for what are tides? There are some other things you could say, um, like if someone had never heard of tides and then you gave them this sentence, they wouldn't really know what it was. Like they wouldn't be able to envision it. So the other things to say are the water line at beaches goes up and down, right? The tides are the this is some information that would help most people understand what we're actually talking about. And like the tides are different than the waves. That's another thing.
Yeah.
The specific chunks thing isn't a very good explanation, but you get the rough idea, I think.
Yeah.
Like the on average thing, most people probably wouldn't follow that very well. So you could think about a way to explain it if you needed to for someone who doesn't know what that means. But yeah, you sort of have to factor the waves out and see like you look at like the average point on the beach that the water touches over
Yeah.
like a
I mean, you could
rolling
say,
10-minute window or whatever.
yeah. If you just had like the average water line at the beach goes up and down, um, like something like that. If you just use the word average in there, it might be obvious that it's not happening really quick like waves do.
Shoes. Different shoes, activities, cultures, qualities. I don't know really, that one. I'm not sure really what it means. I guess it's just the outline.
Yeah.
Scarcity of
Just
resources. I don't think scarcity of resources is what they're for. Like that's
no.
a factor in how you make them or something.
I don't think I actually included anything about that. Um, I talk about because if I was going to put it in there, I was going to put it under culture or something like that. But uh, the third paragraph where I've mentioned people choose some shoes because of their culture. I don't think I've got anything about materials. That was just a brainstorming thing.
Yeah, tangentially, I think that padding is broadly bad for running, and that shoe design is really bad.
Um, yeah. I actually well, I've had a stint with barefoot running before.
Yeah, they also design shoes to be way too narrow because they think it looks better, and like literally squish people's pinky toes in a lot.
Yeah. I do mention, what do you call it? Yeah, I do mention pain or deform the foot over long periods of consistent wear in the second paragraph. But that's talking about like dress shoes and stuff as opposed to generally.
I think it would have been good to mention fashion or something similar. Like you talk about dressing up, but that doesn't fully cover it. Like it's not just high heels. Like people will get Nikes that are fashionable, like or business shoes that are like shiny. Like all kinds of shoes can be chosen for fashion.
Yeah. One thing that um I sort of yeah, I did think about it a bit, but I didn't put anything in there about it. So I guess, yeah, is that like, so I felt like, particularly with the shoes one, that I was just giving lots of examples as opposed to necessarily answering the question. I guess a what question sort of lends itself more to that though, as opposed to a why. Um,
Yeah, I
but
think covering and protecting feet and fashion are the main answers. And yeah, there is some utility stuff like belts if you count them as shoes.
so when I was thinking about it, I thought that covering and protecting feet were a thing that all shoes did, like even fashionable shoes. Uh, like if they didn't have a sole, for example, then people wouldn't wear them still. So they sort of like those specific shoes are for fashion, but they still like cover and protect the feet. Um,
Yeah, I agree. That's fairly universal. Have like at least a little bit of benefit in those areas.
I do talk about sandals and stuff a little bit at the end of the second paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah, overall, I think that you're having trouble a bit with identifying with the problem situation. Like these seem a little too artificial for you. I think you're not getting into a good mindset of like it was really your problem. And that's why it's a bit aimless for what details you include. Whereas if you picked problems that you were interested in or you had like a real purpose in your life for writing about, I think that would help give you more guidance about what info to include and how to organize it.
Yep.
So, yeah, for next time, I think that would help. Try to think of some things that you know a lot about so it wouldn't be too hard to explain, and preferably reasonably accessible, that you would actually explain to someone, like you can actually envision yourself. It's a thing that you've explained to people before it actually comes up in your life for like some reason. And then maybe try that.
Yep. Um, yeah, there were some, like I definitely found some of them more and less fun. Like the fungi one I picked out particularly as like a 5-minute thing. I mean, in general, I'm sort of more drawn to the sciencey ones. But that's sort of why I wanted to do some of the other ones as well, because I feel like that's like, I don't know, I guess I feel like I should be able to do them, sort of thing. One thing that I found was like, so I mean, I got twice as many done in the second session, I think. Well, I mean, one of them's sort of cheap. But I definitely was more productive in the second session. But I think like my speed is an issue at the moment. Like spending like 4 or 4.5 hours doing that feels, yeah, low output, I guess.
Yeah, so the main idea of fungi, by the way, is that they're decomposers. Instead of getting their energy from the sun, they like find dead things to get their energy from. It says like feeding on organic matter.
Yeah, I didn't. I might have actually been, well, actually, in terms of so I think the only thing I hedged was, so in the second to last paragraph there, so they don't photosynthesize, fungi get all their nutrients from the soil, I think.
Yeah, it's good that you knew you weren't sure about how they worked.
But yeah, but this one was, yeah, the 1 minute planning, 5 minutes writing, and I feel like that was actually sort of quite good. Like by comparison, there was a lot of, because I didn't focus too much on trying to make my like paragraphs similar lengths or things like that. I just sort of like wrote stuff and went to the next point.
Yeah, variable paragraph length is fine in general. I wouldn't worry about that much. The main issues with paragraphs are when they're really long or really short. Um, Paragraph breaks provide organization. But if you put them like nowhere or everywhere, then those have approximately the same effect of not providing the organization. You
Yeah,
just
yep.
need medium length paragraphs, and some short ones is fine. But if they're all short, then you don't have organization. And if any of them are really long, then there's a lack of organization there. But
Yep.
some short ones and some medium ones works fine mixed together.
I feel like that's it sort of reminds me of coding a bit in like a really old adage is keeping like functions to like under 80 lines is a figure that I've heard dating back to like the 60s.
80 sounds pretty long to me. I know those languages were more verbose though.
I think that was actually like a particular type of assembler and from NASA. So
Oh, like
like
really verbose then.
yeah. But I completely agree, like um yeah, if you like it's yeah. Keeping it chunk sized and understandable is really important. Um the There is like a bit of stuff that I'd fix up if I edited this, like the paragraph about them being smelly should probably go down one, because I talk about above ground bits like twice in the like the first sentences of both paragraph above and below talk about above ground bits. But other than that, I think, or from memory, the structure seemed reasonably um,
I think this
ordered.
too is interesting. My intuition says that it's not the correct preposition. I would say different way than trees. Um, Prepositions are something where people have a lot of intuition about which ones you're supposed to use where, and it can be hard to point out like strict rules for some of them because there's a lot of like really generic ones, but we have a feel for like which ones to use in which cases. if you reread this, like, does it seem correct to you? Or
Um, it does seem odd. I couldn't put my finger on why, and what I was thinking was like, should I be using like TOO there? Um, and that seemed silly, so I didn't end up thinking about it much. Um, but it does feel odd. I mean, if I was writing it again, like I'd, or if I was spending more time on the sentence, um, I'd probably end up changing I'd probably say differently, like fungi smell differently to trees or
yeah,
from
you can
different from
definitely do
trees.
it that way.
Yeah,
See, dictionary actually has usage for all three. So different from is the most common and most accepted. Different than is chiefly North American, so that's probably why it sounds right to me.
and then different to, although
Different
common
too,
in Britain.
although common in Britain is disliked by Americans. So it's partly just a subculture thing then.
But yeah, no, it's interesting you pointed out though because it did feel odd. It might be that like I've got way in there as well, like in a different way to trees. Like smelly in a different way is sort of a odd thing to say.
I think it makes sense. I can understand it.
So the one thing that I did say, like the last part, I realized as I was writing it, that it's the only time where I talk about similarities between them particularly. But like some plants, you can't eat all fungi. Some fungi are very poisonous to humans. Um, I mean, some plants are very poisonous to humans as well. Um, uh, but it was like, 10 seconds ago type thing, so I didn't end up fixing it. But that's the one thing that I would sort of particularly considering what we've talked about before. Like it's not answering how are they different from plants.
So they do have cell walls, so that's another similarity to plants.
Yeah, this was more than any other topic, I wanted to Google this. Um, particularly like I mentioned when I talk about like the tree of life thing, I think there's like protozoans or something or eukaryotes. I've only just remembered eukaryotes now. But I just mentioned animals and plants because I couldn't remember anything else. So I definitely I would have searched for this if I give myself more time. Um, but on the other hand, it's like if this is like comparable in quality to the other stuff where I spent like 6 entire minutes on this and more like an average of 30 plus on the other ones. Um,
Yeah, the fungi one, you
or
kept it simpler, so it was actually generally a bit easier to follow, I think. The other ones, like, there's a little bit of a tone of writing like an encyclopedia article or something like a bit official, I think, that gets
I think
dropped out here.
yeah, the way that I feel like I'm writing with the other stuff is that I have like some sort of complex explanation in my head that I'm trying to simplify, as opposed to with this, it was much more amorphous.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with this one, you sort of started at the bottom and built up, and you wrote it as you went along, it sounds like. Whereas
Yep.
with some of the other ones, you like constructed a complex thing in your head first, and then you had to try to translate it to the page, as like a secondary process.
Yep. All the other ones were like that, I think. I sort of did write them as I went along, but like, I spent time editing, which I didn't do with this. And yeah, I tried to sort of figure out everything that I wanted to say before I was writing anything. Um, there's a lot of like iteration as I went along, um, like focusing on each sentence. a decent length of time as opposed to just writing it as, you know, banging it out there and coming back after I've written everything down.
Having a
Like
fully
maybe,
formed thought in your head is tricky to communicate because it's hard to give the entire thing to a reader as a chunk. So, in order to share it with other people, it's important to unpack it into some sort of components. Yeah, you have to try to figure out like what sort of chunks people can understand at once. And that's roughly what a sentence is supposed to be. And then you combine a few of those chunks to make some sort of fairly small point, which is what a paragraph is.
yep. Yeah, I think that's sort of like the photosynthesis example is, sorry, not photosynthesis. Why shouldn't you look at the sun one is probably a good example of that, where I like planned out a lot. Like I knew that I wanted to talk about overloading the retina with energy, so essentially you burn it. Um, and I then end up like wanting to talk about light and lenses and uh, like too many photons hitting a molecule at once and stuff like that. Um, maybe that's so. Like the thing that I mentioned, this sort of trickiness of going into too much detail or whatever else, is maybe a symptom of this trying to come up with a idea and then trying to be too concise with it, sort of thing, or too exact.
There's like a really quick attempt at the sun one. Maybe there's something useful there.
Yeah. So I feel like a thing that sort of is pretty common is that like there's stuff like, for example, here, one of the things that you uh don't really talk about is light. Like, I mean, you talk about a light, but that's a different thing. But in terms of like light, in terms of physics, we've just got your eyes light receptors slash detectors. Um, whereas I spend like a lot of time talking about retinas and light, which is not really, I guess, one of the things that I'm not really keeping in mind is that if someone's asking why shouldn't you look at the sun, they're not asking like how is it that the sun does permanent damage to one's eyes if you look at it for long enough. Um,
Yeah, it's a pretty basic question.
like there's a theme of stuff to remove. Um, I mean,
Yeah, even saying like receptor or detector is probably a bad idea. I just didn't stop to think about what would be a better thing to say. Like you could say camera. Your eyes are sort of like a camera that gets overloaded with light, like shorts out its circuits or something.
yeah, I mean, I have like 16 things of light here and 5 in the first paragraph. I mean, I talk about people using magnifying glasses to burn wood at one stage.
If you really want to make it simple, you can just say that it can overload your eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I
go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing that I'd uh like change there, I was sort of conscious of like last week when we talked about stuff like y- like a bright light sort of thing, as in like where it's not where you could have a measurement there, but we don't put a measurement because it's sort of the wrong level of detail. Um, anyway, yeah, the one thing I'd sort of mention there is like explicitly like about, like a bright house light or something versus the sun, and the sun being, why would I say that the sun is even brighter than a normal thing? People know that it's bright. Um, like, is it necessary to do that there? I don't really feel like it. No one's gonna be reading this and not realize that the sun is bright.
I mentioned that it's bright.
Um, oh yeah, no, I was thinking about the last sentence, sorry. Like, as in more in comparison to, but then it's even less necessary.
Yeah, so do you have any questions about the writing stuff?
I guess not particularly, but that sort of bothers me because I don't feel like I'm doing a great job at it. Um,
Okay, do you want me to try writing the other prompts quickly so you can see how I do it?
um, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I just did the sun. What is swimming? Um, why do people
BRB for 2 seconds.
Yeah, I thought of this because I wanted to explain why the tides are notable by a contrast. Like the default is kind of the water doesn't actually move, it would just be level.
Yeah, I was thinking like global
But
displacement is important for tides, which obviously mentioning like global displacement is a bit too complex maybe, but yeah.
okay, so did you notice anything?
Um, yeah, so one thing that stood out to me just then was the contrast from how we talked about like the pain aspect of shoes.
What?
I'm not sure. The pain aspect, like I said, these kind of shoes might not make life easier for the wearer and even cause them pain or deform the foot over long periods of consistent wear.
Ah,
Um, and you said people care enough about fashion to wear shoes that actually hurt their feet. Um, and so one of the things I noticed, just sort of thinking about it now, was like I'm primarily talking about shoes making life easier. Um, and then the sort of like this secondary clause, whereas you've just got one clause that I think it's just one, yeah. Or maybe that's anyway. It basically contains the same information, um, but it's sort of more on topic, I guess. Um, yeah, I don't know. It sort of seems somewhat prototypical of what I've been writing. Um,
yeah. Here, I think I wanted to indicate that the fashion aspect is more important for a lot of people than the utility. Like they don't want zero utility, but their focus is more on the fashion. Like on the one hand, shoes are for protecting your feet. On the other hand, a lot of people don't actually care that much about that, and they're doing this other thing.
mm,
There's a bit of a contrast. Like if it's supposed to be for protecting your feet and then it hurts your feet, something's going wrong. Or, at least there's a change of values or priorities.
yep.
I didn't worry about organizing by topic. Like I just threw things into single paragraphs. Like the topic sentence doesn't really work for everything I wrote, but I didn't seem like a big deal for this.
If it's one paragraph, it's sort of, I mean, topic sentences, I feel like have less meaning the shorter the thing is you're
Yeah.
writing. Um, just because otherwise the alternative might be just having like lots of single sentence paragraphs, which is a bit pointless.
Yeah, I wrote this a bit more like how people talk rather than how they write books. And when you're talking to someone, if they ask you this question, you're welcome to say like one thing and then say a second thing. And a transcriber might just put them as one paragraph instead of a bunch of single sentence paragraphs or something.
Yeah.
It's it's simple enough overall that people can understand it, even though it's not fully organized in all the ways. If you're trying to say a bunch of complex stuff, then you have to worry more about paragraphing.
So I'm sort of wondering if I like missed the point a bit. Um, in that like a lot of my answers are pretty long. Um,
Yeah, the focus in my mind is not on the content, especially. Like, I don't care that much what answer you give. The main point is to try to say things that are like really clear and understandable and decide something to communicate even if it's wrong and then actually communicate the thing you intend to.
yeah, okay. Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess there's two things. One of them is like, um, I'm unhappy with how long it took me with most of them. But the other thing is like, I'm not sure if there are major problems in some of the stuff I wrote. Like some of it, there's definitely like, sort of some stuff that I can see, but um, stuff that I finished.
Yeah, I think your main problem was what I talked about earlier with not having clear enough goals in mind, because they seemed like artificial problems to you. So if it was more integrated with your life, I think that would help.
Yeah,
Like something you would actually explain. And then, like, if someone asks you about like flux, you probably know what to say more. Like you have more priorities in your mind about what info you want to share and why you want to share that and like what your
yes,
priorities
yeah.
are.
Or like if I want to ask the person questions to get an idea of like why they'd be interested in it type thing. Like there's a lot of different
Yeah.
things that I do there. That I'm sort of like not doing here. Like not even conceptually imagining someone. Uh, I feel like I might like I don't know,
Let's
like that
let's
I
try a
wasn't
really
clear on the
simple
exercise.
one and see if you can do
Mhm.
it quickly.
Cool.
How do you use a microwave?
Okay. So that's my quick thing. I realized when I started up, I sort of don't actually talk much about how to use a microwave, but I sort of provide background stuff. Um,
Yeah, I saw
I
it. And
don't know
then you
where I'd
gave
put
them
it otherwise.
more concrete instructions towards the end.
I sort of feel like it's one of those things where it's important to know what not to do before you have the instructions for what to do. Sort of because I mean, this is maybe like not an appropriate concern for this exercise, but like when you like have instructions and people go through instructions as they're reading it, and then on like the next page there's like a warning about that previous step that you've just done. Um, just that
Yeah,
sort of stuff.
that's more of a concern with longer instructions. Like, I started with what to do, but it's only one paragraph, so I wasn't too worried that they would put metal in before they finished the paragraph.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so yours is generally pretty understandable. So that's good.
There's stuff in there that I tend to like. One thing that I've got here, like the microwave should make a buzzing sound while the timer counts down. Um, so that's not really a topic sentence, but it's a short thing, so okay. I'm not really sure if that's relevant. Like I'm providing extra information so that there's like ways to confirm that things are working, as opposed to
Yeah.
like, yeah, like if you, especially if you had an old microwave with like a physical knob, you might like, I mean, there might not be a go button, but yeah, you might not know whether it's working or not. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing to include, but that's probably an audience question as well.
Yeah, it's a reasonable thing to include. Like, you could include it or not include it. I think your first sentence is particularly good because it's a good introduction to the topic that tells people like the main thing that's going on in a short and simple way. I have a similar first sentence. I
Yep.
wanted to introduce it before getting into what to actually do. Okay, so
Yep.
another thing I thought we'd try is brainstorming solutions to a problem. So, for example, my microwave broke. How do I cook dinner? Come up with like 10 solutions.
Um, so, um,
Yeah, I think cold dinner is a good thing to include, even though it says how do I cook dinner. You could say that it's like, you could be picky and say it's a wrong answer because it doesn't involve cooking dinner. But when people ask questions like this, they're usually not being super precise. And they want a solution to their problem, and their problem is they want to eat dinner. And a
yeah.
cold dinner solves their actual problem, not their stated problem.
So yeah, so I mean, the way I read it was, or what I usually hear people saying is like they talk about making dinner, um, as opposed to cooking it, uh, often, and which I guess is more compatible with like some of the lazier options. Um, but like prepare would be like the more general term, even if you were like if you're a chef or something, you'd like prepare a meal. And so it's sort of it's easy to read into the implied meaning behind those sort of questions. Uh, it's not really a separate solution. Um,
I
I
listed a
mean,
bunch because you did stove and oven, and I figured there were a bunch of other ones, so I went through some.
yeah. Um, yeah, I put like alternate heat source there because it's just one of those things where you can sort of like, or it's like the general replacement kitchen heating device. Um, I mean, yeah. Um, I've just indented the ones that I feel like uh, I don't really want to count because I feel like they're just sort of synonyms.
Okay, so that's good. You thought of a bunch of stuff. Some of them more outside the box than others. Okay, so how about something different? Brainstorming topics.
I was in brainstorming topics.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. Um, okay.
especially problems with solutions rather than just like topics.
So are we thinking of like concrete things or yeah, we are, right? Like I mean
Uh,
this being an example.
yeah, concrete is
Um,
fine. It doesn't have to be concrete, but something where there's a problem and you could come up with solutions.
okay, so um I mean yeah, I mean I immediately notice getting sort of stuck on the first like thought sort of thing. Um, particularly like so, one thing I could write down is like a thing you have which you rely on breaks. Um, like there's that sort of thing, or
Um,
there's like concrete stuff.
yeah, it's
Um,
fine to have some like that. You can have a mix. Another example of a kind of abstract one would be sadness.
um, okay. Um, Okay, so are these like on, like in the right direction, I guess?
Yeah, those all look
Um,
fine.
yeah, okay, cool.
Here's the ones I wrote.
Yep.
Okay, so you pick one from either of our lists that you don't know much about in advance.
I don't know much about. Um, so getting a date with a stripper, I've never thought about that before. Um, understanding why dog's a man's best friend, maybe. Um, in terms of things I know I don't know much about, um, your kids keep fighting. I feel like people won't listen to your great ideas is one that I don't know much about, but it's also one that I would, well,
It sounds like
I
when
don't
you've
know.
already thought about it, it's just a hard problem.
Yeah, yeah. So a bunch of the other stuff
Yeah.
I've thought about.
Okay, yeah. So
Um,
pick one of the ones that you haven't thought about much and give it a try.
okay. Um,
Would not recommend intimidating her, but thinking outside the box.
Um, yeah, I sort of feel like everything above the step back is pretty ad hoc. Um, in that, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, paying her has a good chance to work, but not get what you actually wanted. Like you could technically get a date, but it wouldn't be like a real date, you
Well,
know?
yeah, I mean, this is sort of, I don't know, maybe an interesting point. Like, I definitely had the sort of, I mean, during parts, I sort of lean into the idea that the goal is literally just to get a date with any stripper, as opposed to like a particular one. Like, um, where is it? Like, yeah, um, figuring out, yeah, like the stripper's close to you. Um, and then like, like dating a male stripper instead because they might be easier dates. Um, they're sort of a little bit facetious in that they ignore a lot of background goals that someone would have typically, like the idea of it leading to a relationship, um, or like the gender being important, etc. But it's sort of like, I mean, the part where I'm like lost at the top, where I just sort of like start writing down whatever comes to mind, is, I mean, a pretty prototypical way of not, or how not to get a date with someone. Um, as in, no way did I actually say like just like attract her.
Yeah, that's okay. I
Um,
think you did well because you didn't get stuck and you wrote a variety of things. And those are really important traits for brainstorming.
I remembered at this point, um, the big skyscraper project plan
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, that's good too. Like realizing that you don't really know what you're doing. So coming up with a meta plan, like researching it, that's fine.
Well, one of the other things that occurred to me is, so I mean, uh, I've read the first half of a few books, on this sort of stuff. Well, this stuff in general. Um, and there's a lot of stuff that like that didn't come to mind immediately when I was like writing this part, that when I like went and stood back and tried to like meta plan a bit more, I started remembering a lot more of it. Um, like as in, because it's not stuff that I think about regularly, it doesn't come up easily. But when yeah, step back and take a broader picture and like think about like doing research, then I then start to think about all the times that I've actually done something akin to research. Um, yeah. Um, I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the um, can't remember what it's called, the conjunction fallacy or the conjunction thing. Um, but
Yeah,
I think
conjunction fallacy.
one of the reasons that I was like more lost originally, um, is because I was dealing with the particular case of like getting a date with a stripper as opposed to like getting a date. Um, even though if you're able to get a date, then chances are that knowledge is pretty applicable to getting a date with a stripper.
Yeah, it's
It's
a
unlikely to
special
be like totally
case,
wrong.
but if you're having difficulty, then breaking the question into parts can help you get unstuck. So you can brainstorm about getting a date, brainstorm about strippers, and then try to put them together afterwards. The thing about this one is a lot of the standard dating advice in our culture is like semi-effective with normal girls and really ineffective with strippers. So like there's a lot of stuff that actually just doesn't transfer over well.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that I was thinking about. I think more in the top half was like there's tons. I imagine that there's tons of pathetic guys who would like continuously try and get dates with strippers. I mean, I'm being pretty casual there, but yeah. So if you did for whatever reason, then you've got to like not be them. So that's actually another thing that I didn't think is like research who strippers don't date. Um, yeah,
Okay, so it seems like you're decent at brainstorming already. That's good.
yeah. I think there are some times where I can get stuck on things, but that's more like a mindset thing than a. I don't think that, I'm not sure there's any particular topics I'd get stuck on.
Okay, let's go back to writing and try a couple more quickly. So,
Mm.
how about budgeting? Write like 1 to 3 paragraphs on budgeting advice.
I'm not certain about the sentence, but I'm just going to write it out anyway. Not that I'm not certain about its correctness, just on whether I should include it. Oh gosh. All right. So the thing about like this, for example, did you know was the sentence that I was talking about that I wasn't exactly sure on whether I should include it or not. I think it's better now that I rephrased this opening sentence to be in terms of your goal, as opposed to like it's important to understand. That was sort of more iffy.
Yeah, that claim is questionable, by the way. If you save
This one.
twice as... Yeah, because it's not a fixed amount of money you need to retire, because also the retirement date affects how much money you need. So if you're saving up money twice as fast, like, you'll get to $1 million saved twice as fast. But if you're at a younger age, you need more money saved before you can retire.
Um, so I think this is like relatively simple as a calculation, but the goal is for passive income to replace value lost to inflation and provide the equivalent inflation adjusted income that you were living on before. So because the more like the larger a proportion you save, the less you have to, or the less you're living on, then it sort of has this weird way it works out. But that's like with a quite a simpler thing. equation. So I'm not sure how that actually works in terms of if you start to factor in variance or if you try and save
Yeah.
only so much that you end up at 0 when you die.
Yeah, if the goal is to live off only the gains and preserve all the capital, I think that's a very common, like, bad way of thinking about it that people do. That's very, like, unrealistic, and they draw this bright line between the gains and the capital. And I think their inflation adjustments are often just wrong or even or neglected or whatever.
Yeah, I think people, well, usually people just like stick in 3% there and don't question it much more, I think. Um, but yeah, but it's one of those things where if you have like a bad, I mean, the risk of those sort of plans is that if you have like a GFC or something, and particularly if you've got uh, money wrapped up in other stuff, then you can't ever sell any assets to supplant your income. Otherwise, you're then like eroding the thing, which can snowball badly. Um,
Well, I think that's part of the confusion is people are really focused on like dividends or interest, but um, you can do the same plan with stocks that have no direct returns. They just accumulate value and
hmm.
just sell off like 2% of the stock per year or something because the value of the stock has gone up enough that year to make up for it. And it's
Arguably,
basically the same plan.
um, yeah, the thing that occurs to me about that is that it's sort of similar to just like not reinvesting the dividends. Like if you thought about dividends as like shares that you actually sold to get that money, then
Yeah.
even if they were like created, like the idea of creating um, like assets or whatever else, um, like as in if a company was issuing dividends in terms of shares, is sort of like I think people have different intuitions about how to reason about it, even though fundamentally they're sort of like able to be transformed between different systems. I'm not explaining that very well, um, but um, but yeah, people have bad intuitions about these sorts of things.
Yeah. So we took it in a bit different directions because you got into retirement planning and I was focusing just on the immediate how do you figure out what to buy like this month kind of thing more.
Yep.
Okay, so did you read mine? Do you have any like thoughts or
I'm
questions
just on
or
the second paragraph. So yeah, I mean, one thing that occurs to me is half of mine uh, talks about like financial planning more than budgeting. Like budgeting is a microcosm of that, um, which is yeah a little bit more about the day to day, month to month than the years and years. Yeah. One thing that occurs to me is I feel like I assume more pre-existing knowledge um, of the audience, which is sort of
yeah,
paradoxical.
that's really common with like intelligent people who write things that are like hard for most people to understand. They sort of write for people like themselves a lot. I think that's a big piece of it.
Hmm.
Whereas like you can see this is not really written for myself.
No,
Probably. You can
um,
imagine.
I mean this feels like I could give it to like a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old, and
Yeah,
like
and
help them.
I don't even do this stuff. Like dividing up a monthly budget into categories is yeah, I've never done that.
No, neither have I. I've tried, but I just find it gets to the point of like trying to categorize what you've spent money on, and it's like, nope, not doing that. It probably becomes more important when, like, if you had like kids or something, and you've got like more and different kinds of bills, and there's more significant like issues and cost if you miss stuff like this. I can see it being more important in some cases like that. Um, Whereas like there's relatively low impact if I spend too much money 1 month, for example.
Yeah, I'm not against this. Like, I think it's an okay system for people.
I think it helps people keep stuff in their head, as in like I've got, $100 to spend on restaurants this month, which like gives them permission as well. Um, Sort of like giving themselves permission to feel okay about doing it, sort of thing, as opposed to like feeling guilty.
Yeah.
So I can see why it works for some people. But yeah,
Yeah. Your
so
paragraphs were, I think they're pretty understandable. And the first sentence is a reasonable introduction to the topic, like a kind of an overview.
I thought that was good. I'm not sure if like the managing your money, which like it could just be budgeting is knowing how much you're earning and how much you're spending and on what. Probably planning is the important thing that I missed out there. But
Yeah, yeah. It's not just retrospective monitoring. The foresight important.
yeah, um so I sort of hint at that a little bit in the first paragraph, but I think yeah, in the last thing here, like which probably shouldn't have been right at the end, but know how much you're going to spend ahead of time and make sure that you don't overspend. Um, that's the closest I think I get to planning, except like what do you call it, financial planning type stuff. But yeah,
Okay, so for next time, um, try watching the analyzing lies stuff and try some more writing. Does that sound good?
yeah. Or just pick other topics from here, or do you reckon there's a better?
I think like we talked
Well,
about earlier,
we talked about the
but try
solutions,
picking
yeah.
some that you can imagine yourself actually explaining in real life, so you have a better idea of what to include or not.
Yeah, okay. I won't do any of these, but I'll try and pick questions in this sort of style. Something that's like simple enough to actually think, as opposed to, some deep technical thing or whatever. But yeah, okay, cool. Um, that sounds good. I'll see you in a few days.
Okay, bye.